Okay, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us on our weekly AJA Zoom event, and welcome to any new people this week. I'd also like to welcome any people from our communal organisations who may be watching, and we hope you enjoy the session. We also have people watching on Facebook and some who listen to the audio replay, which is broadcast every Thursday at midday and Sundays at 4 p.m. on J-Air Community Radio. That can be found at FM 88 in Melbourne or at j-air.com.au everywhere else. So welcome to you all. My name is Alan Friedman. I'm Vice President of the Australian Jewish Association. And on your screens, you can also see David Adler, who's President of the AJA, as well as our guest for tonight, lawyer Marc Zell. And of course, the topic is the inside story about Ben & Jerry's ice cream franchise in Israel. The format will be a discussion/interview type discussion for the first 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions. Now, as I always mention, if you want to ask a question, what we ask you to do is raise your hand electronically, and you can do that by clicking on the reaction icon down the bottom. That lets us know that you want to ask a question, because we do need to enable you to unmute yourself. If you like, you can put written questions on the chat function, and Robert Gregory, our Director of Public Affairs, will read some of those out during question time. And of course, if you don't like the chat, you can always disable it. Now, the world watched with great interest and some disbelief, I suppose, as American owner of Ben & Jerry's announced a year ago that it was stopping sales of its ice cream in, quote, the occupied Palestinian territories, because they said it was inconsistent with their values. This boost to the BDS movement raised a furor in the Western world and prompted a rebellion against Unilever, which saw its stock price fall by about 13%, and this wiped about $20 million off their market value. Avi Zinger is the Israeli franchisee of Ben & Jerry's. He launched and won a legal action against Unilever, but that wasn't the end of the story. In order to disentangle itself from all the controversy, Unilever sold the Ben & Jerry's franchise to Zinger, but the woke board of Ben & Jerry's then sued Unilever to prevent this from going ahead. The lawyer acting for Avi Zinger is Marc Zell, and to hear the inside story on all this, including the latest developments, we're delighted to have him join us tonight. Marc, thank you for your time and welcome to our AJA Zoom event.
Alan, thank you so much for having me, and you too, David, and good day or good evening to all you all in down under.
Okay, just before you and David have a chat, I wonder if you could tell us a little of your background and how you came to represent Avi Zinger, the Israeli licensee for Ben & Jerry's in Israel.
Well, okay, first of all, let me say that it was a great honor for me to represent Avi Zinger and his companies. I wasn't alone. I was a member of a legal team that consisted of my colleagues in the United States, the Brandeis Center for Human Rights, that's headed by Eliza Lewin, attorney that's defending human rights for Jewish students and others in the United States, and Nat Lewin, her father, who is a prominent member of the United States Bar and has appeared many times before the United States Supreme Court, oftentimes in connection with Jewish issues. But I was the only Israeli lawyer involved on the legal team, and therefore I had a very close contact with Avi Zinger throughout, including this week after the victory in the United States. My background is quite simple. I'm a native of Washington, D.C. in the United States. I moved to Israel with my family, which consists of 8 children and 19 grandchildren at the moment, in 1986. I'm a member of the bars of the United States, Maryland, District of Columbia, Virginia, United States Supreme Court, and graduate of Princeton University and the University of Maryland School of Law in Baltimore with honors, and former law clerk to the Supreme Court of Maryland, the Court of Appeals. I have offices actually here in Israel, in Jerusalem, and Tel Aviv, where I'm at the moment, and also in Washington, New York, Estonia, and one place that I'll leave unmentioned in the Middle East, which would be a little bit sensitive at the moment. And what I do is practice international law, both litigation and transactional work across the globe, in all well, 6 of the 7 continents in any case. There you go.
Okay, David.
Okay, thank you again, Marc. Can you start, please, by just giving us a bit of a timeline overview? Most of us will have heard a bit about the events. How did it unfold? What happened? So just a sequence, if you can.
Sure. Well, first of all, Avi Zinger has had the license to manufacture and to distribute and sell, market Ben & Jerry's ice cream products for 35 years. And he, in fact, was the only unaffiliated manufacturer of Ben & Jerry's ice cream outside the United States for this entire period of time. And he had an excellent relationship with the founders of Ben & Jerry's, Ben and Jerry and themselves, and with their boards over the years, and really outperformed all expectations with regard to the quality of the ice cream and putting in place programs that were consistent with the social mission of Ben & Jerry's, which is something that was very important to them from the outset. All of that came to a surprising halt about a year ago in July of 2021, when the board of directors of Ben & Jerry's in Vermont, which is where the company got its start, decided under pressure from the international BDS, Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement, which is aimed at delegitimizing Israel as a state, not only in the territories, but altogether. They put pressure on over the years, and finally, the board of directors in Vermont decided that as long as Avi Zinger was selling his Ben & Jerry's products manufactured in Israel to Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, that was considered to be inconsistent with their social mission. That's a change in their policy, and they instructed Avi Zinger to stop selling his products in Jewish communities throughout Judea Samaria and also East Jerusalem and the Golan Heights. So Avi Zinger politely said to them, "I'm sorry, I can't do that. It's against Israeli law, both the Israeli law against discrimination and the Israeli anti-boycott law, for me to comply with your request. And as a personal matter, I wouldn't do it in any event." That was too much for them, and they then issued a notice in July of 2021 to Avi Zinger saying, "Okay, your license, your manufacturing and license, which you've held for 35 years, is coming up for expiration at the end of 2022 in December, and we're not going to renew it for the first time in all 3.5 decades." And it was that was really the straw that broke the camel's back, and Avi Zinger engaged us to bring a litigation in the United States challenging the legality of that decision by Ben & Jerry's in Vermont, which was a wholly owned subsidiary of the Unilever Corporation. By the way, Unilever, as a result of this decision, David and Alan lost $26 billion in their share value as a result of this and other problems that they were incurring at the time. So that litigation was filed in the beginning of 2022 after long discussions, and that brought about within a relatively quick period of time, a radical change in Unilever's position regarding this whole affair. They saw the light and contacted, I can't go into too many details because of the confidentiality restrictions, but they commenced negotiations with us, with Avi Zinger, and through counsel. And make a long story short, at the end of June of 2022, Unilever agreed to sell its entire Ben & Jerry's business in Israel, Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, also including Gaza, Jerusalem, the Golan Heights, to Avi Zinger. So now he has the sole and exclusive right to not only manufacture Ben & Jerry's ice cream in these areas and through the state of Israel and these other areas, but also to sell and exploit them without any interference by Unilever or its subsidiary companies. That's where we are today. As you correctly indicated, after the June 29th settlement or closing of the deal between Unilever and Avi Zinger and his companies, Ben & Jerry's in Vermont, in an unprecedented move, filed suit against its own parent company in federal court in New York, seeking to overturn the deal with Avi Zinger and his companies. And that just this past week, by order of Judge Andrew Carter from the Southern District of New York Federal Court, they denied Ben & Jerry's request for an injunction to stop the transaction, and that's where we are today.
Marc, the chair of the Ben & Jerry's separate board, not Unilever, the separate board, is a woman by the name of Anuradha Mittal. What can you say about her? Because from what we've read, she seems to have had a very pointed political interest.
Well, let's say that when she was first appointed, she and Avi Zinger, despite their ideological differences, had a fairly good working relationship. But that all changed rather suddenly in 2020 and 2021, where she became a full-fledged proponent of the BDS program, and she's led the charge to bring an end to Ben & Jerry's affiliation with Avi Zinger, and in fact advocated a policy that would have put an end to the sale of Ben & Jerry's products to Jews, Arabs, Christians, Muslims alike throughout Israel and the territory. So she's a pretty radical type. I've really never met her, but she and Avi know each other quite well.
Yeah. Now you said that Unilever after a while saw the light. I wonder, can you elaborate? Did they really see the light, or did they just respond to the financial pressures? And we know that a number of US states invoked their anti-BDS legislation. Ron DeSantis, for example, was one of the first, and he released a letter instructing that the pension funds from the state of Florida should be withdrawn from Unilever. What do you see as the dynamics that were happening?
I have to be careful here, David. I can't. I mean, I could answer your question, but the confidentiality restrictions are rather stringent. So let me kind of dance around it by saying that Unilever, I don't think they expected the kind of reaction that they got from the states in the United States and from the general public, the Israeli government, and of course, most importantly, our litigation. That was something that I don't think that they anticipated. And they had to make a reassessment of the total situation in light of those evolving realities that we've discussed, and came to the conclusion that they should keep the politics out of ice cream, and the best thing to do is just to focus on doing business as one of the world's leading brand owners in the ice cream area, to be sure, and in other areas. And they felt that those realities, economic, political, and otherwise, legal, of course, militated in favor of a different position. I really take my hat off to them, because it was a rather dramatic change on their part, and I have to say that it was because of ideas that they came up with during the course of the negotiations that we were able to finally settle this thing. I mean, and we've been working with them hand in hand ever since the June 29th closing, and including in this litigation in the Southern District of New York that was concluded this week. I can't really say enough for the Unilever management and their legal team with whom we were working quite closely since end of June.
Oh, that's good. Well, let me take you out of anything that could have confidentiality and ask you a couple of things more generically. I mean, we read that the Israeli economy is doing very well, that BDS hasn't had much of an impact, at least as we see it. So why was it important that it before, I mean, obviously from Avi Zinger's point of view, it's important, but more broadly, why is it important that to fight cases like this?
Well, I have to say that, and I should emphasize at this point that in addition to Unilever and in addition to Avi Zinger's efforts, the Israeli government, through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Prime Minister's office, took a very active role in combating the BDS efforts to bring the Ben and Jerry's connection to Israel to an end. And I have to say, I met with representatives of the foreign ministry on a number of occasions, and they worked very hard to bring this about. Why did they do that? Well, I think the main reason is that they saw this attempt to drive Unilever out of Israel, okay, effectively in this important area of ice cream sales, which is a high profile sector in their business, would create a precedent, a very unwelcome precedent for other companies to do the same. And to their credit, the foreign ministry understands that while BDS has not caused any real deleterious impact on the Israeli economy as a whole, it has the potential for doing exactly that. And so we don't take this, and the foreign ministry didn't take this line down. Even Avi Zinger saw it the same way. It was not only a matter of his own narrow financial interests. He's a true patriot and a lover of the Jewish people, and he was not going to enter into any transaction which did not resolve the greater issues at hand, including those for Israel and the Jewish people as a whole. BDS is a very toxic, pernicious movement, and they are determined to cause harm to the state of Israel and to the Jewish people as a whole. And they're not going to stop with this, I have to say. This was an important victory against them, but this war is not over. And so we all have to be vigilant to prevent them from carrying out their plan of action.
Well, I wonder if, based on your experience, you feel that you could comment at our invitation on the Australian situation. I did, when we first spoke, mention that Australia does not have anti-BDS legislation. We actually think that Australia should have anti-BDS legislation, and our organisation, I'm putting up on the screen now, was involved in the drafting of legislation for Australia, which was modelled on that which exists in most American states now. We got to the point where our parliamentary draftsman had looked at the US legislation and Australianised it, except this was opposed in the early stage by a number of Jewish organisations here. Based on what you've said about the importance of fighting BDS, is there any comment you can make about the significance of anti-BDS legislation and whether we should continue to pursue it?
Well, I'm not familiar with all the intricacies of the Australian political system, although I do try to follow it as best I can. I can say this. I think it's important. Legislation of this ilk is extremely important. You can see the effect that the anti-BDS legislation at the state level in the United States had on this particular dispute. And I think, and were it not for the existence of this widespread legislation in the United States, I'm not sure we would have had the same kind of leverage in our discussions with Unilever that we ultimately did. So I think it's very important. And by the way, Israel itself was very late in coming to this. I mean, the United States and my friends who were working on this for years in the United States were really out in front on this issue. Israel was a latecomer itself in adopting legislation against boycott, the boycott against Israel itself. And so I think this is quite important at the federal level, by the way, in the United States. Australia, of course, is a federal system, but in the United States, the Congress has not adopted legislation that was aimed specifically against BDS. There are attempts to change that, and I hope that in the coming months that will change at the federal level. But I think it is extremely important, and I encourage your efforts in Australia to pass this legislation. And I'll kind of finish with a question that I'll pose to you. On what grounds were the Jewish organizations opposed to this?
There were two grounds, Marc. I mean, I can't speak for them, of course, but the two grounds were at that stage a few years ago. They argued that Australia doesn't really have a BDS problem. So why are you worried about it? There are other ways that we can deal with the issue. That was one argument. The second argument was that if we try to introduce anti-BDS legislation, we're going to trigger a debate. The debate, in effect, puts Israel on trial in Australia. So I think both those arguments are very weak. And we need...
Well, I would agree with you, David. I think that's really a cop-out on the part of the Jewish communities. To say that Australia doesn't have a BDS problem, I don't know what that means. Do you think the state of Arkansas or the state of Florida or the state of Utah, for example, has a BDS problem in the United States any more so than Australia? I doubt it. It's a matter of principle. And I think the Australian people stand in solidarity with Israel, just as the people of the United States do, because of our common shared values. And the attempt by these folks at the BDS to drive a wedge between our peoples based on these really pernicious attacks on the state of Israel and the very right of the state of Israel to exist, I think is reason enough for the Australian federal legislatures and maybe your state governments or also to consider adopting this legislation just because it's the right thing to do.
Agreed. Well, look, no argument. We do stand on principle. Now, I've got one little trivial question just to close on. We've heard that Avi Zinger might rename one of the flavors, perhaps change Chunky Monkey to Judea Samaria. Any truth in that?
No, that's a joke. I mean, he was kidding, and I think he learned his lesson, because that little joke of his that made as a side remark in some discussion ended up becoming the center of all kinds of attention, to the point where Ben & Jerry's in Vermont, I understand, is issuing some kind of an anti-Judea Samaria flavor chocolate. So can you imagine how silly this is? But it goes to show you that the eyes of the world are upon you, and you know what you may think is funny in a moment of levity may actually be a source of great headaches.
Yeah. Okay. Alan, I don't know if you want to toss in anything at this stage.
Yes, I've got a couple of questions. Thanks, David. Marc, there's lots of American companies that do business with Israel. I'm just wondering how and why did the BDS movement decide that Ben & Jerry's was going to be the one that they tried to hang their hat on?
Well, I have to say something about BDS. I mean, they are toxic and pernicious, all those adjectives that I've used, but they are very sophisticated. And they understood a couple things. First of all, Ben & Jerry's as a company from the very outset, long before companies, this whole idea of corporate social justice became faddish as it is today with the so-called ESG initiatives that you all are familiar with in the investment arena. Ben & Jerry's was the first company that really made this part of their commercial program and the social mission. It didn't include anything about Israel at the time, but they made social issues extremely an integral part of their business model, business strategy. And the BDS people understood that, and they understood something else. Ice cream, which seems to be fairly apolitical, is something that a lot of people like and enjoy. And if they could somehow make inroads with the pioneer about social justice in the corporate world, that's Ben & Jerry's, to get them to weaponize their ice cream and turn it against the state of Israel, that was going to get a lot of attention, and it sure did. Okay, as soon as this whole thing came up in July of 2021, the whole world paid attention. I mean, it was every media outlet. It was discussed in every corner, every synagogue, church, all kinds of things around the United States, certainly in Israel, and it became the center of attention. So the BDS hit pay dirt when they came up with this strategy. Unfortunately for them, and fortunately for us, and for Israel, and for freedom-loving peoples around the world, they failed, and their efforts boomeranged. So that's to bring it home to Australia. So I think it was ultimately a terrible tactical mistake on their part. But when it was first playing out, they were reaping a lot of the public relations benefits of this thing. And as I said, this war is not over.
And Marc, at the outset, this would have looked like a David and Goliath battle. You know, a little business operator in Israel taking on a giant like Unilever. When you first took on the case, were you optimistic that you could get somewhere with this, or did you really think that, look, we'll give it a go, but we're pushing uphill here?
Well, let me say that in my career, I've made a point of battling giants. Okay, I mean, even as we speak, I'm conducting litigation against the Republic of Hungary on behalf of Holocaust survivors for the first time to put Hungary to justice for what it did to our people during the Holocaust. That case has been going on for 12 years without any remuneration to the lawyers. I'm the head of the legal team there, including plaintiffs from Australia, by the way. I'm suing the United States government on behalf of so-called accidental Americans, the State Department. We're suing them because of their attempts to prevent American citizens from exercising their constitutional right to renounce their American citizenship. That's another David and Goliath situation. I'm suing the Department of Treasury and the Internal Revenue Service in the United States for failing to abide by federal laws protecting small businesses in connection with rulemaking by the Treasury Department and the IRS. I mean, these are examples of things that I've done throughout my career, and it's not a matter of, it's a question of what's right. And if I believe that we have a viable legal position, as I did in the Ben & Jerry's case for certain, and Nat Lewin and I both came up with this idea of bringing a lawsuit against Unilever and its subsidiaries because they refused to renew a license which they had every right under commercial law principles to terminate. They are just not to renew. They could have done that. Okay, they made a mistake though, because they explained explicitly and announced to the entire planet that they were refusing to renew this to Avi Zinger's license because he refused to comply and violate Israeli law and United States law and policy, okay, regarding discrimination and boycotts. And that changed this case from an ordinary commercial case, which we would have had no chance of winning, into one where we actually had that we won, okay, in the end of the day. So this is kind of how we think. You know, we're not afraid to get out there and to put our legal reputation on the line on behalf of what we consider to be justice. And that's not just some kind of a trite cliche. We mean it, and we do it because it's right to do it. We try to come up with legal theories that will sustain judicial review. That is our approach, and we don't always succeed, but in a case like this, we have succeeded, and I'll continue to do this. We've got some more coming down the road too, which you may hear about in the weeks to come.
We'll look forward to it. So the BDS people obviously had a strong ideological motive for doing what they did. I'm just wondering, did you and your firm have an equally ideological motive for defending Avi Zinger because of the situation in Judea and Samaria? Did that factor into it, or are we talking about a strictly legal situation here?
Well, look, I don't want to be disingenuous with you. I live in Judea. I live in the village called Tekoa, which is the birthplace of the prophet Amos. Okay, and I've been fighting this battle for Judea and Samaria personally for many years. Most of the 36 years that I've been living here in Israel. But I'm not the only one. As I mentioned, I'm part of a legal team, and the legal team had different views about this subject. But what they felt was wrong was not so much the issue of Judea and Samaria, but the fact that the BDS movement, which is not only interested in Judea and Samaria, the BDS movement wants to delegitimize the entire state of Israel. Okay, let's not get this wrong. Okay, this is what they're intending to do, and it doesn't matter if they sometimes exploit the fact that some of these issues concern Judea and Samaria. For example, when I led the fight against the Airbnb boycott of Judea and Samaria a couple of years ago, and we won that one too. But ultimately, these organizations are not only concerned with the West Bank or Gaza or East Jerusalem, whatever. They want to bring the state of Israel down. Their objective is to wipe the state of Israel through legal procedures, lawfare, off the map of the earth. And that's why the fact that I may have one perspective about the greater ideological issues or some of the ideological issues that you're discussing really is irrelevant. It's about the survival of the Jewish state and, frankly, the Jewish people.
Okay, we've got a few hands up, so we'll go to questions in a moment. Just before we do, I'll mention that if you're listening on J-Air, this is the Australian Jewish Association Zoom event, which we have every Wednesday night. Our guest tonight is lawyer Marc Zell, who acted for Avi Zinger in the Ben and Jerry saga, and which he won, which is wonderful news. I'll just hand over to David for a very quick moment to tell us what's coming up, and then we'll open up the floor to questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan. Just as we always do, if anyone here is not yet supporting HAA, once this event is over, please go to the website jewishassociation.org.au, where you can apply for membership, make a donation. Don't forget to like and follow the Facebook page for daily updates on our news and views. Next week, we're privileged to be hosting Olga Deutsch, who's the Vice President of NGO Monitor, quite a remarkable woman, and we'll be looking at the link between terrorism and the Palestinian NGOs and focusing down on those that Israel has recently designated as terrorist organisations. What is the evidence? Why is this important? And we just want to foreshadow coming up in a little while at Limud Oz in Melbourne on the 4th of September. A couple from the AJA team who you might recognise, a certain Alan Friedman and Michael Bird, will be conducting a session there talking about the relationship between AJA and some of the other communal organisations and revealing some very interesting materials. So particularly for those in Melbourne, that would be something to consider.
Thanks, David. Yes, come along and join Michael and I. We're one of the very few conservative sessions in a very woke Limud Oz, so we'd love to see you there. Okay, speaking of Limud Oz and Michael is first in line, so we've got, you can unmute yourself, Michael, then we've got Andy, Terry, Morris and Anthony. Michael, fire away.
Yeah, hi, Marc. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, I hear you.
Yeah, I don't think you remember, but you may remember, I interviewed you in Jerusalem for Ellen and I, our program on radio, Nothing Left. And that's, you were representing the, I think, Republican Party in Israel.
Yes, I do remember, Michael. Good to see you.
Okay, now, my question is, Ben and Jerry, both Jews, albeit liberal Jews, with them, and you take J Street, New Israel Fund, are they all what's wrong with American Jewish diaspora at the moment?
Well, the American Jewish diaspora and the Jewish diaspora in general is a very diverse group of people, all right? And they have a wide range of views over a wide range of topics, including their views of Israel and Israeli political or geopolitical situation. So I think that organizations that are Jewish organizations that are identified with the progressive left in the United States, like some of the ones you mentioned, really don't help the cause of Israel and the Jewish people. We're at a particularly difficult crossroads now. I don't need to explain it to the viewers or the participants in this call or this program this evening. You know, with the Iranian agreement about to be signed, you have these organizations are strong proponents of the American administration, which is going basically looks like it's doing everything it can in its power to bring this about, to bring the rejuvenate this very, very dangerous agreement. And you have these organizations that you've mentioned that are supporting that, which, you know, it's very disturbing. But look, we live in Australia and the United States and most of the Western world. We live in a free society. And I certainly support the right of people with divergent views to express themselves freely. On the other hand, there are times when that the nation, our people, our Jewish people, and maybe even Western civilization as a whole is in peril. And we have to be responsible when we speak out about these issues. I think we have to be responsible. And sometimes the things that we say at a time at crucial junctures like this can have ramifications that are very dangerous for all. So it's free speech, that's true, but responsible free speech.
Yeah, thank you. Andy, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay. Hi, Marc. It is refreshing to hear you talk about Judea and Samaria, because the international media speaks only about Israeli settlements, our occupied territories. And I was wondering, the legal documents, if you can tell me, did it specify Judah and Samaria? And then also, since you live in the area, Judah and Samaria, what is being done to educate the world on who really owns this land?
Okay, so let me say that in the legal papers we filed, one of the things that I really I took a strong position is that when we mention these areas, we also use the expression Judea and Samaria along with the West Bank, because most of the world understands, they think they understand where the West Bank is. They may not understand what it means Judea and Samaria. But on the other hand, I have to say this, Andy, that we tried very hard not to make this litigation into a platform for arguing the greater issues of Jewish rights in the land of Israel. Okay, this was not the purpose of our litigation. As strongly as the views I have about this, and my own view is that the Jewish people is the indigenous people of the land of Israel. There's indigenous, and I hope I'm not offending anybody if I say as indigenous as the Aboriginal peoples of Australia are to the Australian continent, and therefore we have every right to, and this is my view, every right to not only inhabit Judea and Samaria. I mean, Judea is where we get our name as Jews, after all, isn't it? But we do so as a right, not because of any kind of military prowess or whatever, as a right, as a human right, as a fundamental right of an indigenous people to live in and not to be ghettoized in our own country, but that's my view. But the litigation involving Unilever and Ben & Jerry's in Vermont was not about that. It was about the attempt by Israel's enemies, BDS, to politicize the sale of ice cream, okay, and to do so on the basis of their own views regarding the rights of the peoples that live here in the land of Israel, okay. That we objected to, and that is what the litigation was about. We didn't go into the greater, broader issues that you were mentioning, as important as they are. And I think it was right from a tactical point of view for us to do that, because as important as the litigation was in the courts, there was connected to it a very carefully thought through public relations effort in order to educate the public generally about what this case was about. And what we tried to do is create a greater consensus within the public at large, so that they would be sympathetic with Avi Zinger's position, and that turned out to be the case too. We won on that front as well as in the courts.
Thank you. We've got a written question. I'll just go to Robert Gregory to ask the written question, and then we'll go to Terry.
Yeah, just got two questions for you, Marc, written questions. So where does BDS get their funding from? You mentioned they're very well organized. So who's behind the scenes funding them? And the other question was, you mentioned you're involved in some litigation against Hungary. Is that, there's a lot of Hungarian survivors and descendants of them in Australia. Is that something people can join, or that's happening now?
Yeah, okay, so let me talk about funding. This is a great question, and no one really has a clear answer to this, but we know from various sources that there are different organizations, including governments, that are funding the BDS movement, okay? I have to be careful about who I mention in terms of governments, but you know, for example, the Qataris are funding this. The Iranians have poured money into these kinds of programs, as well as private organizations, okay, including left-wing progressive organizations, including more than one organization that was founded and headed by Jews. So the funding that BDS has no problem with their covering their budget. They have virtually unlimited funds, and they're coming from a wide range of sources, some sovereign, many private, some Jewish.
Okay.
Okay,
What about
as to your second question, let me jump to your second question. Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Alan. The second question about the Hungarian lawsuit, it's called Simon versus Republic of Hungary. It's been already going on for 12 years, and it's been to the United States Supreme Court within the last year. And it's still going on very much. Again, we're the fourth time in the DC Circuit Court of Appeals in Washington, which is the second highest court in the United States. Again, after having beat Hungary below for the third or fourth time. But what we're doing in that case is trying to have a final ruling that the United States courts have jurisdiction to hear this case against Hungary, which enjoys, as you know, sovereign immunity under international law, and American law creates exemptions for that, including where property has been expropriated by the foreign government in violation of international law. And so right now, the big issue that the American courts are going to have to decide within the next several months is whether when Hungary expropriated and threw out its Jewish community, 500,000 people, and sent them to the gas chambers in Auschwitz and Mauthausen, where the question is, when they did that, were they expropriating the property of their own citizens? This is the key question. Were the Jews who lived in what is today Hungary, citizens of Hungary, after the Hungarian government systematically deprived them of every single incident of citizenship or nationality, including the right to live? And the Hungarian government is taking the position that they could commit, in accordance with the Supreme Court decision of the United States from February of 2021, they think that when they did all of these atrocious acts to the people, the Jews living within the boundaries of Hungary, that they could do that without violating international law, and therefore they would not be able to be sued in an American court. Our case now that's going up on appeal, and will be decided in the next several months, will decide for the first time whether the Jews who lived within the Hungarian borders were stateless persons, and if so, whether Hungary could expropriate their property and take away their businesses and their livelihood and every incident of citizenship without liability in an American court. That's what's going to be decided now. That's the issue that the Supreme Court of the United States left open a year ago, and we still have to decide whether the U.S. courts have jurisdiction. Once that happens, if we prevail and the courts hold that they have jurisdiction to hear these claims against Hungary, then the case, which is a class action, will be open to all the survivors of the Hungarian Holocaust and those that have not lived to see this day, like our Australian plaintiffs, their families, their successors, their children or grandchildren. They will have the right to participate in this case and see justice done, hopefully, for the first time in 80 odd years. So that's your answer. It's still open. There's nothing you have to do. We just keep in touch with me, and I'll let you know what's happening in the case.
And Marc, might this apply to other European countries like Poland?
Well, that's an interesting question. This case is only about Hungary, okay? And Hungary is different from Poland because Hungary retained its sovereignty, its existence as a nation throughout World War II until the very end, okay? And that's different from Poland. Poland ceased to exist as a nation. It was had been occupied, split between Russia, Soviet Union and Germany in 1939, and later was under sole German occupation until the end of the war. Okay, so the situation in Poland is different. I'm not suggesting there are no remedies against the Polish government for Jewish properties there. That's a different story. But the liability of the Polish government, unlike that of Hungary, is different. And Hungary is responsible. It's the same regime. It's the same entity, sovereign entity that existed before World War II, during World War II, and after World War II. Although governments have changed, of course, it's the same entity, and therefore they are under international law. Hungary is liable so long as we can sue them in an American court. If we can't sue in an American court, there's no place on earth where our clients, the survivors of the Hungarian Holocaust and their families, will be able to get any justice.
Yeah, okay, I understand. Terry, your turn. Please unmute yourself and ask your question, and then Morris.
Hi, my question is really sort of an offshoot from the case. I look at America at the moment, and it's never been more politically divided down the middle, and the Democrats seem to be getting encroached upon the whole time by more radical left-wing views. With your connections in America, do you see any sort of long-term danger to the BDS legislation that's been passed in the States, and indeed whether the federal government will maybe go the same way? Probably not in November, but I'm looking longer term.
Well, I'm hopeful that will happen. In the current political constellation in the United States, I don't think it's likely, but that could change in November, and then after November comes 24, where there'll be presidential elections. So it's entirely possible that within the near future, 2 years or less, we will have a new constellation of political views in Washington, which will change this. Now, one of the encouraging things is that the courts thus far in the United States have upheld the BDS, anti-BDS legislation against constitutional challenges, primarily under the First Amendment. And so that's a good thing. But this could also come to the Supreme Court. A case like this could come to the Supreme Court. In the current constellation in the Supreme Court, I don't know exactly how they will decide this issue. Even so, there's a conservative majority on the Supreme Court, but they have a different view about constitutional issues than, let's say, some of us may have. And that will be an interesting issue to see when it comes before them, if it does. But I'm optimistic about this. I think, for example, in New York, which is a very democratic blue state, we say New Jersey, both of those cases, the states we referred to in our papers in the Ben and Jerry's case, because in both cases, both those blue states strongly supported the withdrawal of their pension funds from investing in Unilever because of what happened in this case. So I think this is an issue with right-thinking people, and I don't mean necessarily politically right-thinking people, but people with good common sense, but from both parties. I think this is an issue that can engender bipartisan support.
Okay, Morris, your turn. Please unmute. And then Anthony.
Hi, Marc. Marc, you indicated that the Israeli government got behind Avi's action, rightly so. What was the feel in Main Street? What was the feel from the person, the man in the street? Did they get behind this? Did they support Avi? Did turnover go over? Albeit this all took place sort of during, was announced initially during COVID.
Yeah, that's true. Well, first of all, Maurice, hello. Good to see you again. It's an excellent question. The thing is, the Israeli public reacted to all of this with a lot of confusion, all right, which continues to this day, all right. On the one hand, they were very much in favor of Avi's position, okay, and I think that was clear, but there was a confusion about who exactly were the bad guys here, all right. Remember back in July of 21, Unilever and the Ben and Jerry's in Vermont both took this position against Avi. And in Israel, as the case now in the United States, there was a widespread upheaval and uproar about buying Ben and Jerry's products because of this situation. In Israel, the situation became really confused because the public was protesting against this anti-Israeli pro-BDS position that Unilever and Ben and Jerry's were taking back a year ago, and therefore wanted to boycott buying Ben and Jerry's. But doing that, they were shooting Avi in the back because He manufactures all the Ben and Jerry's ice cream that's consumed in Israel. It's not imported from someplace else. He makes it. So when people in Israel were boycotting Ben and Jerry's, they were boycotting Avi. And this situation continues to this day, even after the dramatic events of this week, where the Ben and Jerry's in the United States and the BDS people were beaten down and denied the remedy they were seeking by Judge Carter. People in Israel were still boycotting Avi because they thought that the Ben and Jerry's in the United States was the same Ben and Jerry's that's making the ice cream in Israel, and that's not the case. So one of Avi's great challenges now in this transitional period, after he's acquired the business, is to try to show the consumers here in Israel that he's the good guy and they should continue to buy Ben and Jerry's ice cream sold in Israel.
Okay, thank you. Anthony, please unmute and ask your question.
I'm actually Hazel, pronoun she. Marc, you mentioned a couple of times that the war is not yet over. So despite the victories with Airbnb and Ben and Jerry's, what do you envisage still happening with BDS? And other than anti-BDS legislation, do you see any other way of combating it?
Okay, also excellent questions. BDS will look and is looking for the new targets, okay? And in this kind of woke environment that we see in the United States, where ESG, corporate social justice has become a banner issue for investors, okay, including institutional investors like BlackRock. BDS will continue to try to inject its particular point of view into the ESG agenda, and they will look for new targets. It won't be necessarily Ben and Jerry's. Well, they may continue to work with Ben and Jerry's to cause more problems, but there'll be others, and guaranteed. And it'll apply both to companies doing business with Israel and academic institutions like Ariel University, with which I was associated and brought a lawsuit successfully against the BDS people in Spain. And it'll happen within political campaigns in the West, in your country, I imagine, and in the United States and Western Europe. They will not stop. So that's why I say the war is continuing, and we have to be vigilant. We have to look whenever they appear, whenever they start making their arguments, we have to be ready to stop them. How do we do that? Okay, well, legislation is one way. We've talked about that already. You asked that question, but there's also other things we can do. First of all, we have to ourselves educate our constituents, our neighbors and friends, Jewish and non-Jewish, about the dangers posed by this. That's an educational thing. That's an ongoing activity, just like this program here that the AJA is sponsoring this evening. We have to continue with programs like that to the community as a whole. Okay, and that vigilance, I think, is the most important thing we can do. We can also continue to fight them in the courts. That's something that we're doing in our small way, and others are also doing it in different parts of the country. The war on the college campuses. This is something Eliza Lewin from the Brandeis Center are working on. In fact, there was just a whole program about anti-Semitism in the United States on CNN, okay, which was not particularly fair. Maybe you saw it in Australia. But she spoke on that program and the work that she's trying to do on the campuses in the United States. And I'm sure you're having problems like this on your campuses in Australia as well. I mean, where Jewish students are afraid for their own physical safety to even display the indicia of their Jewishness or to speak their minds and so on, for fear that they're going to be attacked by fellow Jews and non-Jews who are adopting the BDS program. So there's so much to do, and we have, each of us, Jewish and non-Jewish, that care about this. We have to keep on our wits about us and to keep the vigilance and keep on top of this so that we fight it whenever it rears its ugly head. That's all I can say to you. Okay, but that's a lot of work. a big responsibility.
Yes, I think you're right. And look, we have come up to time. Apologies to Helen and Anna. Marc, I want to thank you for what you've done. You've just been amazing. Perhaps I might ask you if you can launch an action against Joe Biden for signing the JCPOA agreement. You might have a chance of winning, I would say.
Well, I think politically we might. I don't know about the courts. That's another topic. But if I can find a way to do it, Alan, I will be. I'll be there. I'll be in the forefront. I'll be happy to do it.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us. It's nice to say hello to you. I might just mention to people listening that Marc's family and my family and that of Max Wold in the audience all came from the same little shtetl in Poland called Biała Podlaska. So there's not too many of us, and it's nice to meet our landsmen where we can. Marc, thank you very much for what you're doing, and we wish you all success in the future, and we will follow your activities with great interest.
Well, thank you, Alan, and God bless all of you in Australia, and a shout out to Max Wold for all the great things that he's doing for the old country, Biała Podlaska.
Yeah. Thank you. Just before we go, the L'chaim program with Morris Klein is on right now. It's on 3ZZZ FM 92.3 or 3ZZZ.com.au. That's all we have for tonight. Join us next week when we are joined by Olga Deutsch from NGO Monitor. Don't forget you can keep up to date with what AJA is talking about on our Facebook page. Please like it and share it widely. But for now, we wish you all a very good evening and look forward to seeing you again next week as usual. So from me, it's bye for now. Good night, everyone.